Hello and welcome back to Cargo Cafe. As always, I'm your host, Libby Hausman, and right now it's just me in the studio, but we have some really exciting guests that we're super ready to bring out here soon. So today we're going to be going over all things trade in 2025. As we all know, there's no shortage of things to talk about from this crazy year, and we're really excited to just recap it with you all today. As always, feel free to drop any questions in the chat at any time. We want to hear from you and get started on all the things you want to know. So let's bring out our guests. First up, we have Chance Pope. Chance been in the logistics and transportation industry since 2008, specializing in freight forwarding and international logistics since 2011 with various roles and experiences from operations to management. In July of 2024, he joined the team at Bestway International and is currently leading our export department as Senior Director of International Services. With years of experience in global shipping and supply chain management, Chance focuses on creative, practical, and effective solutions for clients and business growth. Welcome, Chance. Happy to have you.
Thanks, Libby. Glad to be here. I'm excited to chat with two of my favorite people to talk logistics with.
Perfect. Well, then let's bring them out. Next up, we have our Vice President, Jack McDonough. Jack is coming up on 7 years at Bestway International. He's a licensed customs broker and has worked primarily in our import business. For the last 2 years, his primary focus has been on continuing to build Bestway's operation divisions into a cohesive suite of services across import, export, and North American freight. His favorite part of his job is working with new and existing clients on creative solutions for their logistics needs. And he's here serving holiday spirit.
That's right. Somebody had to do it on the Bestway team. So I'm here and making sure it's holiday season, even on Cargo Cafe.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited to have you. And rounding out our guests today, we have Riley Wiles. Riley is a managing partner at Bestway International, has been with the company since 2014. He's the founder of our North American Services Division and has been closely involved in building Bestway service offerings over the last 11 years. Now, Riley spends most of his time working with customers on the front end, helping them navigate complex freight challenges and turning them into practical, scalable logistics solutions. So, welcome, Riley.
Jack, I can't believe we wore the same pullover, buddy.
Yeah, well, just repping the brand. There's no shame in that.
Yep. I brought some holiday cheer, though, in my coffee mug.
There you go. Love it. You guys have all been on Cargo Cafe before, so it's always nice to have some familiar faces back. Wanted to round out the year with just kind of a recap of everything that's been going on. As I mentioned at the top of the show, if you have any questions at any point, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we want to make sure we're hearing from you. We do have some pre-submitted questions to get us started, so I think we should just get right into it.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So my first question is for you, Jack. This is kind of the hot topic. Wanted to hit it up front, make sure we got into it. So with the ongoing uncertainty with the pending IEEPA Supreme Court case, how are you helping importers manage risk and plan for multiple policy outcomes?
Yeah, I've gotten this question a lot, obviously, the what should we be doing type of question now. I have taken an approach of basically inventorying what shipments you have out there that could be affected. So the first place to start with that is to talk to your broker, have them query any entry from 2025 that had an IEEPA provisional tariff on it, and send you a report with that. Important to note that the Supreme Court is not reviewing Section 301. They're not reviewing Section 232, which is on steel, aluminum, copper, furniture items, automobiles, etc. This is only concerning IEEPA tariffs. So these are country-specific tariffs and tariffs on China, Mexico, and Canada for fentanyl. But your broker, if you tell your broker, give me a list of all entries with IEEPA provisional tariffs on them, that should be a pretty clear directive to them. They should be able to deliver that to you. I'd also recommend that you have signed up or have easy access and familiarity with your company's ACE portal. That is a CBP, Customs and Border Protection portal, where you can go on and review all entries that are made under your own EIN number. Obviously, you should ask your broker to do most of the heavy lifting when it comes to reporting for you, but this gives you access to everything that has been done on your EIN number. Regarding the future, what I'd probably tell you would be to prepare your customers or your product catalogs for both types of pricing models. We don't know when the Supreme Court is going to rule on IEEPA tariffs. And so I would call it prudent at this point to basically prepare your pricing to your customers as if IEEPA was in effect and as if IEEPA was not in effect. Obviously, just communicating with your customers, talking to them about the impacts of the IEEPA tariffs on your pricing. I'm sure you've done that already. It'd be hard not to at this point. But having those conversations again of, hey, we've got these two pricing models that we've got set up ready to go for you, depending on whether the IEEPA tariffs go into effect or not, et cetera. Definitely a prudent conversation to be had at this point. Something interesting that just came out recently, this was just yesterday, I believe, the Court of International Trade ruled that liquidations of entries, which happen about 300 days after entry has been made, liquidation will not affect importers' ability to apply for refunds. There was a lot of fear out there that if SCOTUS waited too long, that there wouldn't be an opportunity to recoup tariffs back. That has more or less been debunked by the Court of International Trade. They've ruled that you will be able to get refunds on entries that have liquidated. And so that's a big weight off a lot of importers' shoulders.
Yeah, I know you mentioned that there hasn't been a ruling yet, but is there any kind of timeline or estimation on when that ruling is going to come down?
No, you can look back at how long the Supreme Court has taken in other cases to kind of get a decent understanding. I know some of the trade attorneys that I've talked to, who obviously are much more tapped in on this sort of thing than I am, we're hoping for something by the end of the year. Obviously, we're creeping up on that now. The fact that the Supreme Court took this as an expedited hearing, meaning they advanced the hearing, would seem to indicate that there would be an expedited review and ruling. But obviously, there's a lot of variables that go into it. They don't release dates or anything like that. So hopefully soon. I would say I would be very surprised if we got to the end of February and we have not received anything. But the sooner the better, so that I can stop fielding questions about it and you importers can start having a little bit more of a bedrock on which to make decisions by.
Yeah, absolutely. So switching gears a little bit, Chance, my next question is for you. Kind of on the export side of what's been happening in 2025, what kind of unique advantages or disadvantages did U.S. exporters experience in 2025 compared to their global competitors?
Yeah, so the tariffs have been global and disrupted quite a few things, but exporters haven't felt it nearly as much as the importers, of course. But a couple of the segments that have really enjoyed advantages, or the industries, would be the pharma industry, civil aviation. Both of those industries have continued to grow this year. High value manufacturing is something that the administration is very keen on bringing back to the U.S. or continuing to grow it here back home. And so those sectors, think semiconductors and the technology products, those are really enjoying a lot of benefits from government programs and things like that. And they're all things people need. So it's going to be hard for a foreign country to put tariffs, retaliatory tariffs on those products because they need them so badly. And in most cases, we are a global leader in those. A couple of the disadvantages, the biggest, most obvious one, which doesn't impact our customers a lot, but just from a regular exporter standpoint, is agriculture exports have suffered tremendously from the retaliatory tariffs, mostly China. Even despite the tariffs, the high tariffs that they put in retaliation, they also stopped buying a lot of our goods. And so the farmers have taken a real hit on that. Soybeans, beef, and pork are all three major products that China is no longer buying. The other thing is anyone using foreign inputs for their product. So if they're not importing a finished product, if they're bringing in components to assemble here, Obviously, those input costs have raised pretty dramatically, depending upon where they're getting those inputs from. So thinking anything with steel, aluminum, copper content, anybody that's bringing in parts of an assembled good are facing higher tariffs on that. And one more thing on the advantages, anybody that was operating in a foreign trade zone definitely saw advantages in the last year because they could bring in product, foreign inputs without paying the duties and taxes, assemble and re-export without paying duties, or if they were selling domestically, they can file for a reduced duty because of the U.S. manufacturing piece.
Yeah, that's awesome. We were just talking about foreign trade zones on our last Cargo Cafe, so nice little natural plug tie-in there. Yeah, moving over to the domestic side, Riley, we've been hearing the term freight recession for a while now. From your perspective, how would you characterize the truckload market over the last couple of years?
Good for shippers, bad for carriers. Probably sums it up the best. Freight recession is accurate, but it's a little misleading. So we had pre-COVID conditions where there's supply and demand. The demand is the freight, supply is the trucks. And the COVID bubble went up, both of them. And then ever since then, demand just went back to pre-COVID conditions. And we're still stuck with all the trucks that are on the road. We're seeing a little bit of signs here lately with tender rejection percentages going up. That could be changing that. But all I can say about the freight recession, mid-22 is when it started, and we're still in the thick of it. And don't ask me for a prediction about where we're going from there.
That's going to be my next question, Riley.
Oh, let me prepare an answer in the next minute and a half before you get back to me.
All right, sounds good. I'll circle back on that one. So Jack, what operational or financial challenges did tariff volatility create for importers in 2025, and where are companies feeling the impact most immediately?
I can't think of any. Obviously, that's not true. 2025 was a year of tons of challenges. I imagine, and in talking with a lot of our customers, they were getting hit from every angle, it felt like. So I think the word that I use the most in 2025, my nominee for word of the year would be uncertainty. It was certainly the worst. It was definitely the word of the year in international logistics. And it felt like I was saying on that every call. So for examples, obviously tariff rate shooting up, dates of implementation of these tariffs being changed, last second or unannounced changes to when items were, or which items were getting dutied. All of this stuff impacts how companies make long-term decisions. That's where that word uncertainty really comes into play. Is something I heard a lot. How am I supposed to make a decision for selling product a year from now when I'm not even sure what the tariff rate is going to be tomorrow? So with that uncertainty and with the tariff rates kind of bouncing up and down at various times of the year, very, very significant changes in buying patterns compared to a typical year. So typically, peak season and post-Chinese New Year, you'd see bumps. Those were all thrown out of whack based on the timing of when tariffs were implemented this year. This type of thing also creates kind of awkwardly high and low inventory levels at various points of the year. And so, and I think most companies have become familiar with abnormal inventory or suboptimal inventory levels over the past 5 years. That's just been part of the game. But it seemed to be exceptionally noticeable this year. So, and then probably the last impact that was really noticeable was when tariffs went down or were eliminated. Like, for example, when there was a 90-day pause in the April 5th tariff rollout that pushed it back to August. During that time, ocean rates popped. They went way up. And so while companies saw a reduction in tariffs, they kind of got hit from the other side in rising freight rates. Most of the customers that we worked with or talked to still appreciated that trade-off, just because, you lose 10% on your tariff rate and you pick up $1,000 per container, that's still in most cases for our customers was a net win for them. But just the back and forth, it felt like a lot of importers probably felt like they could never win in this market. And so uncertainty definitely reigned.
Yeah. You mentioned peak season changing a little bit this year. How is that going to feed into next year if people have different inventory levels? Even though tariffs may be calming down or getting a little more stable, are we still expecting to see kind of peak season differences just due to natural progression of things?
Yeah, well, at this point, all eyes are on the Supreme Court. So what I would anticipate happening if the Supreme Court comes back and says IEEPA tariffs are unlawful, we're going to give refunds, and we're also going to make sure that they don't go into effect moving forward. What you would expect to see there is, regardless of the season, regardless of the time of year, importers basically rush to import as much stuff as they can, because it's become clear, and they're saying this out loud, it's very public, that the administration wants to add backup duty plans. IEEPA is just one tool that they use to implement duties. Section 301, Section 232. If I was a trade attorney, I could name off a couple other sections, but I'm not, are all different tools that the administration can use to implement tariffs. And so whether or not the IEEPA tariffs get removed or not, there's going to be other tariff tools that are being used to implement higher tariffs on certain countries or products. And so in order to get ahead of that, I would imagine most importers would just say, if the IEEPA tariffs aren't here right now, I'm pushing all my inventory ahead, trying to bring it in now. Regardless of the time of year, that would create a pretty significant rush on the market, and you would anticipate ocean freight rates going up there.
So it kind of sounds like we might not see a traditional peak season for a while.
Yeah, I mean, we've reached kind of a stable ground right now, but that's Supreme Court decision is so impactful that whenever it does happen, it will upend traditional peak seasons. See, Riley, I'm not afraid to look into that crystal ball. So I'm curious to see what your crystal ball is showing on the domestic side.
You're an animal.
Yeah, I'm on the edge of my seat to get back to Riley and have him answer that question, but I'll go to Chance to give him some more time to think. Chance, what international markets proved the most accessible or the most challenging for U.S. exporters this year, and kind of what made the difference?
The most accessible ones remained North America. That is under pressure, but Canada and Mexico, because of the existing USMCA, that definitely helped make those two, solidify them as continuing to be our top trading partners. And then in addition to that, Netherlands, UK, Australia, all three of those countries, we maintained a surplus. And now that includes services as well. But those are three markets that are going to continue to be accessible. Looking forward, I would suggest exporters look to some of the partners that have recently been named. We've seen the administration use trade policy in conjunction with security policy, and the recent move to kind of partner with, I believe it's Japan, Israel, Korea, and Australia on the rare earth minerals stuff, I think was pretty unique. It's a new approach, and just judging on that, my advice is look to the partners that the administration trusts, because they're going to put policies in place that make it beneficial to do business with those countries. And then as far as challenging, obviously China is the really big one. They had the really high retaliatory tariffs. I think at one point our tariff was up to 45%, and they were somewhere in that range. It's since come down a little bit, but on top of the retaliatory tariffs, they've also taken a little more aggressive stance in scrutiny of their importing and exporting licenses, and the export controls, and they control their commerce more than our government does, and they've taken a much more aggressive look at a lot of those permissions. The EU has been a challenge, not necessarily because of the tariff uncertainty, but their sustainability and emission standards are just different than ours. They're still highly focused on sustainability, and so some of the regulatory challenges there have been a challenge. India also remains very protectionist. They're working through that. I do think that the administration wants a strong relationship with India, and so I'm confident that they are negotiating to get some of their higher tariffs on U.S. products brought down to open that market a little more to the U.S. And then the last, Vietnam, some other Southeast Asian countries have done a really good job of negotiating, and part of that negotiation, the administration has gotten them to reduce a lot of those tariffs, like I talked about in India, their protectionist mindset. Vietnam was one of the most protectionist countries globally prior to the deal that was negotiated with the administration. And so just continuing to look to those countries that the administration sees as partners and those that have been willing to negotiate with the administration.
Yeah. You mentioned USMCA at the beginning of that. What can we expect to see come out of that in 2026? If I'm not mistaken, it should be kind of a big year for that agreement, correct?
Yeah, July is the review period, and I expect quite a bit of change. If you have been relying on USMCA as a protection, I would prepare for that as if you were preparing for this past year. There's no telling what will and won't be kept. I know that Mexico has been taking ancillary actions that it's believed are in hopes of getting better opportunities and better deals in the USMCA. But in the words of the great Pete Minto, hope is not a plan. And if you hope that USMCA is just going to stick around in its current form, you're going to be severely disappointed come Q3.
I'd also imagine enforcement to continue to rise on USMCA as CBP kind of targets that trade agreement as a easier opportunity than most to take liberties when it comes to value content and so forth. So enforcement, I would expect to be at the forefront of that as well.
Absolutely.
Another exciting year ahead. Absolutely. All right, Riley, we're coming back around. Chance and Jack have both made great predictions for 2026. How are we feeling about freight recession in 26?
So I'm going to steal Chance's hope is not a plan for shippers out there. I see it capacity slowly decreasing throughout the year, meaning trucks are going down. There's some new regulations that have gone into place by the FMCSA. They're clearly making a push to get rid of fraud out there, and not necessarily for getting supply back down, but just to get rid of fraud, of which there was a lot of during the COVID bubble. Annual RFQs the last couple of years, you've been able to kind of set it and forget it because our tender rejection rates were at all-time lows for the last 3.5 years. The latest report showed that where we've been hovering around a 2 to 3% tender rejection rate has just popped up to over 9%, which is a really good indicator. So I would just be prepared to have mini bids in place if lanes start to go awry and carriers aren't showing up. But don't just think that you're going to be able to set it and forget it in 2026. Yes, Chance.
For the dummies in the room, can you tell us a little bit more of what tender rejections mean?
Yeah, so for anything contracted, if you have a lane that has 100 shipments in a year, if 10 of them, you send it to a carrier automatically and they reject that load, it's because they don't have capacity, right? And so that would be a 10% tender rejection rate. We've been low, meaning there's a ton of capacity and the rates are low and it's real easy to go get drivers. They'll they'll cruise around for a bag of peanuts if it pays for their fuel on top of that kind of thing, right? So the tender rejection rate going up means that capacity is shrinking. To me, that's the leading indicator as to where we are in the supply and demand. Normal levels are anywhere between 10 and 16%, somewhere in there. The COVID days, it got as high as like 27%, and that's why everyone's like, I got to get in this market. People are paying an insane amount of money, and and then the demand went back to normal levels, and then everybody's stuck with a bunch of assets they're trying to pay off. Well, now those are starting to piddle off, and the new regulations are getting rid of the fraud, so that the supply is coming back to the demand right now.
If we see a demand spike, would you, even without capacity going anywhere, would you? At what point does the scale tip to where carriers, it's not even just about not having capacity, but it's more lucrative to go find a load on the spot rate market versus a contract?
Well, that's where it is. So capacity is shrinking little by little, which is causing that number to kind of cruise to 9% where it is today. The littlest, not the littlest, I don't want to say littlest, but a slight bump in demand could be that tipping point. Usually when the market flips, it flips really quick. So like a hurricane coming in, some sort of natural disaster, or consumer buying, whatever it may be that takes demand and ticks it up, could just be the thing that 1 week you might be paying $2.40 a mile, and the next week you might be paying $4 a mile, and you just didn't see it coming, kind of thing. So keeping an eye on that. And for everybody, it's individual, right? So it could be specific lanes. Like you don't have to redo your entire bid. Like do a little mini bid. If you're, set your goal of, I don't want it to go above 10% tender rejection rate. If it goes above, just send it out for a mini bid and see what the market bears at that point in time. It might be a little bit more, but at least you have trucks showing up, picking up your freight and delivering on time, kind of thing. So.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with you for a second here, Riley. You've mentioned this a little bit about kind of how the administration's regulations came down on the trucking industry in 2025. We definitely saw some instability with the tariff regulations. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on how that all played into cross-border trucking?
Yeah, cross-border trucking overall was steady, little uptick year over year. So I wouldn't call it a supply or demand issue on cross-border freight. It was definitely an uncertainty issue with the tariffs. So really the only thing we saw was more or less, instead of steady flow throughout the year, we just saw surges and valleys, kind of awaiting answers on certain things. So there was just more peaks and valleys. The amount of trucking that we're doing cross-border has just gone up so much in the last, since like 2018, 19 is when it really started to spike. And with that comes regulation. You have some fraudsters out there and you have a whole bunch of stuff going on. So we're figuring out our regulations along the way, and they're starting to settle into place. July is going to be a big moment, and Chance, you're absolutely right. Mexico's doing all the things that indicate we want to make something amazing work here. And I just see that settling out. So a little less peaks and valleys and a little more stability as our regulations settle into place. We get some more long-term type commitments in place. Until then, the supply and demand just really hasn't changed. If anything, it's going up a little bit.
Yeah, that was a great way to put it. I think July will be interesting. USMCA will obviously not just affect exporters. We've got to have that cross-border trucking as well. So
Yep.
Lots to come. Jack, if you had to sum up 2025 in one lesson for businesses engaged in international trade, what would it be, and how would that lesson shape decisions moving forward?
Probably relationships. I know that's not super specific to international trade or even to 2025, but it became so much more evident in 2025 than it had in the last couple of years. So like even just from our perspective as a customs broker, I mean, there was probably multiple decades worth of trade regulation and laws that were put into place in the international customs brokerage or import customs brokerage field in a matter of 8 months. I mean, it was just an insane amount of additional work and knowledge that customs brokers had to retain in a short period of time. And, the people that had good relationships with their customs brokers, those tended to get stronger. People that previous to 2025 had weaker relationships with their brokers, that probably got weaker as regulations and customs brokers work became more difficult. So the strong relationships getting stronger, the weak relationships getting weaker felt to me like the story of 2025. That can probably, I'm sure there's some importers on this call or just there's freight movers on this call that can attest to this. But your relationships with your customers when all these changes are being made. So like when there's a increase of 15% on goods from Vietnam, your ability as an importer to go approach your customers who maybe are tangentially familiar with this, but not intimately familiar, and talk to them about what the impacts of that are on your goods and the goods that you can provide them. Just in hearing secondhand stories about that from our customers that have told us, we have these great relationships with our clients. They've been super understanding. They understand how this works when it comes to tariffs and how that affects our landed costs. It felt like those relationships got stronger too. When times get tougher in general, of which 2025 was a tougher year when it came to managing the expectations of international trade. When times get tougher, relationships can go either way, and it depends on how you handle that, what the relationship's baseline was prior to it. And so I think for me and for a lot of the people that I talk to, it was that strengthened relationship, the quality of relationship that really stood out as the story of 2025, going even beyond international freight.
Yeah, I think it's great that you mentioned not just the relationship that importers have with their broker forwarders, but also the relationship they have with their clients. As this isn't just an issue that is pressing to us; it's to all consumers, really.
Yeah, and it helped this time around. So back in 2018, when Section 301 tariffs came out, those were those were quite a bit less covered by the media because the impacts weren't as broad and as wide-ranging. They were covered, but it was more of a minor story. When these tariffs came out in 2025, as I'm sure you all recall, it dominated headlines for days or weeks at a time. Every time there was kind of that big change or an implementation date, it was back in the news. So importers did have basically like the aspect that the broad community of people knew something about tariffs. And so when they're approaching their customers, even if their customers aren't importers at all, they could use that terminology, tariff or IEEPA or Trump tariff, something along those lines, and that would resonate with them because they'd heard it somewhere else. So that did help this go around as compared to previous implementation of tariffs.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question on that. As a broker, did you feel any change in like the customer's expectations of what we were doing during this time?
100%. There's always been a lot of variables that can affect your duty rate, country of origin, classification, et cetera. But I would say the amount of variables that could affect your landed duty cost multiplied probably more than twofold in 2025. And so it was, previous to 2025, it was pretty commonplace for even importers they're well up on their compliance would, set instructions for their customs broker, and it was almost like a set it and forget it mentality. In 2025, and this is a good thing, the brokerage process became much more of a collaborative effort between the brokers, or at least good brokers, and their clients to make sure that there was back and forth communication about what's being entered. Is this right? Asking the right questions to get the most advantageous duty rate. Because just like your own personal taxes, you don't want to pay more on them than you're required to. It's the same way with your 7501. And so making brokerage more collaborative effort was definitely key in that realm.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Chance, based on what you saw in 2025, what should exporters start doing, or do differently moving into 2026?
That's a great question. On the stopping front, this kind of goes back to the whole hope is not a plan. stop assuming that trade relationships that you've always had are going to be there. When I think about the amount of money that the administration has collected now, whether they have to give it back or not, well, that's a totally different discussion. But when you think about some smaller economies and those governments looking at those kind of numbers, perhaps they make a move and they put some protectionist, tariffs in place to try and boost revenue, things like that. So even if you haven't been impacted recently, your buyers are still your buyers. I would stop assuming that that's always going to be the case. Again, we talked about USMCA. That's up for renewal in 2026. So those are a couple of big things that I would stop doing on the start doing. And it's funny, all of these topics, as I was kind of making notes for this, each one of them, we've had a guest on Cargo Cafe that can help with this. So while Bestway may not be able to immediately help you with one of these things, we do have resources for them. But geographical diversification, right? Finding other markets to sell your products in. It's not just the tariff world, right? There's a conflict between Thailand and Cambodia right now that's affecting how cargo gets into and out of Cambodia. That has nothing to do with anything that our administration or the U.S. was involved in. So just making sure that you have diversified your buyer markets. And then, again, we talked about this a little earlier. If you're importing components to assemble, strongly recommend you look into either setting up your own FTZ, foreign trade zone, or working with a public FTZ operator. And again, we've just had Mary Rooney on here. She can definitely guide on that. And then two other points: document everything. We talked about on the import side, the regulatory, just CBP looking harder at some of your content, your USMCA stuff. But as we take a protectionist approach, a lot of other countries may, and so they may get more scrutiny, put more scrutiny into what they allow to come into their country. And so having certificate of origins and just a really detailed documentation process from a compliance standpoint gives you a competitive advantage when you're selling your product. We see it on the import side. The importers, that their supplier has exactly the steel content, where it was melted and poured, all of these things. That has become a competitive advantage because, there's also talk about it, even if the IEEPA is struck down and they go to refund, how diligent were you? They're going to scrutinize your original entry before they may scrutinize it. And then the last one that I would recommend is engage with banking. Exim Bank is the government arm that is in export and import financing, and they've got a ton of programs in place right now to support exporting from the U.S. Whether it's technology or pharmaceuticals, there's a ton of programs right now that Exim Bank has in place, and so there's free capital out there for you to expand into a new market. And then as far as differently, tariff flexibility in contracts, if you're developing a contract or signing a contract with your buyer, make sure there's some tariff flexibility in there. If your inputs are being affected, so give you some breathing room, some way to go and work with them. Your supply chain, right? China +1 isn't good enough anymore. You need, China +2, 3, 4, 5, because we don't know. And then aside from staying educated and informed, which Jack talked about, staying close to your trade attorney if you're exporting controlled goods, things like that, but also port diversification. So if I'll use Oakland as an example. We talked earlier about the significant impact of the reciprocal or the retaliatory tariffs on agriculture exporters. The Port of Oakland has seen over a 50% decline in their refrigerated exports. Well, the carriers are going to adjust to that. They're not going to continue to operate on the same lanes and continue to only have half the vessel full. And so you may see some capacity shifts from certain ports that you've used for years and years and years. I know the Gulf Coast ports are seeing an uptick in volumes because of port diversification. So just making sure that you work with your transportation provider to have alternative means in case capacity to or from a certain port isn't what it has been in the past.
Yeah, chance if uncertainty wasn't the word of the year in logistics, then flexibility probably was. And that's been around for the last couple of years. I mean, ever since the kind of COVID craziness happened in the logistics world, but never been more important than now to be flexible because we don't know what's around the next curve. And so making sure you're set up to react to that is paramount.
I think all of us pretty much touched on don't assume and don't set it, forget it, pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely. If we could wrap it all up in one phrase, I think it would be expect the unexpected.
There you go.
And that's what Bestway is best at, right? Is being flexible in the face of changing market conditions and making sure that you guys, importers, shippers, whether it's domestic or international, are able to trust that your provider's got somebody that's ready to move at a drop of a dime. So that's really what differentiates us between the bigger players in the industry. Is we're quick to move, quick to change when that change is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head right there. That's the biggest thing moving into 2026 is working with partners that you trust and that you know will be there for you when things inevitably do shift overnight, and we all know that is very possible and highly likely at this point. Yeah, so before we wrap things up here, I just wanted to give one last mention. If you have any questions, please throw them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. As we're kind of waiting for people to get their thoughts together, Riley, I'll circle back to you with one last question. Do you feel like there was any in international or domestic trucking a trade best practice going into 2025 that didn't hold up by the end of the year?
Ooh, put me on the spot.
I know, I threw a curveball at you there.
Trade best practice.
That doesn't have to be just Riley. Anyone you can say.
Yeah.
A little time to think on it, unless you got something.
No, I mean, I will. I'm going to steal your answer. So can you actually just type it to me in the chat?
I think the trade best practice that really fell apart for a lot of people in 2025 would be they know the timing of when everything needs to be moved and brought in. That with tariff changes and just inventory levels being all out of whack, timing that you used to be able to rely on. And I think from an international perspective, but I'm sure this is true with inventory levels being all over the place on the domestic side. But when, if I'm bringing in, goods for springtime, I need to import it on these dates because that's when I know it needs to be at my facility, and then I'll get it on the shelves at a certain time. Well, if you just stuck to that hard line the entire time, there'd be no opportunity to maximize your avoidance of duties when certain duties were in effect or out of effect. Your inventory levels could get all out of whack if consumer buying patterns change. So I think we saw a lot of people make that change early in the year, or even dating back to late 2024, when the writing was on the wall for additional tariffs. And if you just stuck to what you'd been doing previous years, that really was not going to hold up in terms of maximizing your or minimizing your cost of goods.
Yeah, I saw it on the Mexico side. We had a couple of clients do bids at the end of 2024. They did the chase the bottom dollar game. And like I said, with Mexico, there were surges and there were valleys. And they spent the first half of the year, when there were valleys, like, hey, everything's good, we got a good rate. And then when there were surges, their providers weren't able to meet the demands or be flexible and figure out a game plan to do those things because they're just out there bottom dollaring everybody and doing that. So I would just say bid practices and falling in love with where the market is, and then being hit by just a minor uncertainty, in particular Mexico into the States. So I would say bid practices and just thinking because somebody puts a rate on a piece of paper, everything's going to go all smooth. That did not work out well for them in 2025, northbound Mexico.
Yeah, absolutely. Good job. Way to think on your feet there.
Yeah, Jack sparked it. It's the matching shirts.
No, we're working as a team, Riley.
Win together. Absolutely.
If I can add something there, I think, and this has been a trend over the last 10 years, not for, decades, but people, nearshoring is a common term, or, I mentioned earlier, China +1. But when the reciprocal tariffs hit 60 plus countries simultaneously, just having one alternative supplier in Mexico or Vietnam, you didn't minimize the risk, you just spread it. And so further diversification, having backup plans, having backup suppliers, and to what Jack said earlier, strong relationships, especially with your customs broker. I think the old adage that we have one meeting and set the HTS code and the country of origin, and the broker just does everything from there. It's not possible. If your broker is still working in that mindset, you probably have a compliance gap, and you're probably going to have get a call from CBP at some point. Because if you don't think that they may be understaffed right now, but if you don't think that they're going to go back and be combing through all of these entries before giving any sort of refunds or anything like that, you're again pretty foolish.
Yeah. Well, guys, as we start to wrap up here, do you have any closing thoughts? Wrap a bow on 2025, head into 2026?
Be flexible.
Be flexible. It's a great
Yep.
one.
It's a great one. That's a core value at Bestoway, one of our 4. 2026 on the freight side, everything's really going to depend on how the Supreme Court ruling comes. I think whether or not it gets passed, we're going to see more tariffs be implemented by the administration. But what it could do is offer a unique potential for refunds on dollars paid in 2025, and then should hopefully set the standard of what the market on the freight side is going to look like in 2026. So that's what I'm hoping for. Hoping what Santa brings me for Christmas is a nice Supreme Court ruling, so we have some finality one way or the other, but not holding my breath. I think Christmas might come a little late this year in regards to SCOTUS.
Absolutely.
I would suggest, just taking if you're not already taking compliance seriously, whether you're an importer or an exporter, compliance is no longer just a necessary evil. If you're not looking at compliance in your leadership calls, you definitely should be. It's whether it's the uncertainty with tariffs and HTS classifications and all of that we've talked about, or export controls and the denied parties list, different countries that are on sanctions lists, things like that. It's been an ever evolving policy by the administration, and if you don't have somebody that's really serious about compliance, either in your company or in your corner, I think 2026 is probably going to be another tough year.
Yeah, on the trucking side of things as well, on the compliance side, with all the fraud out there, when you are conducting bids or going out into the market and finding what trucks are going to be picking up for you, very important to make sure that whoever you're selecting has a very thorough vetting process. There's a number of different ways you can go about vetting a carrier, but it's never been more important than right now to do that. So I would say going into 2026 in trucking is just be prepared. Be prepared to vet all of your providers so you don't run into just some of the horrible stories I've heard in 2025 that I think could continue into 2026. And be prepared for capacity shrinking, potential demand spike, and just have a game plan if that world comes.
Absolutely. Be flexible. Well, guys, that brings us to the end of our show. Chance, Jack Riley, thanks so much for being willing to come out and talk to me. Cargo Cafe will be back in 2026, the third Wednesday of every month at 11 a.m. Mark your calendars, and we'll see you guys then.
See you next year.